you, Jo.
Okay, right then, I will share my screen. Hello. Super. So can you all wave at me that you can hear and see me and everything is fine and dandy? Wonderful. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you all for joining us on this beautiful sunny day. I do appreciate it. So what I'd like to talk about this evening is one of my very favourite topics, women from Deir el-Medina. Now, I'm sure you're all very familiar with the site, which housed the royal artisans that created the tombs in the New Kingdom. Very probably, well, the earliest archaeological evidence that we have from the site is from the reign of Thutmose I, when we have mud cartouches on, we have cartouches on the mud bricks. The site might have been begun earlier in the reign of Amenhotep I, as he is venerated along with his mother Amrus Nefertari. But that veneration is actually much later. It's about 100 years after their death. So we can't say for sure when the site was first established. We often talk about the workmen. We are very fortunate that the site provides us with an absolute wealth of information. But what I want to try and focus on today is to try and unpick the evidence and see if we can get close to the women of the site. The site is an absolute archaeological treasure trove because we have such a variety of evidence. We've got the walled village here, which is the best preserved settlement site from ancient Egypt. We have got two necropoli, the Western Cemetery, the Eastern Cemetery, which is now filled in. We have the Temple to Hathor, which is a state-constructed temple, but here we have a whole array of votive chapels. So we've got places of worship that are created by the workmen themselves. So we can already see we've got really quite a unique site, because we've got within the shadow of the village, we have got the tombs, and the tombs are incredibly close to the houses. And we also have here and here we have rubbish dumps, and rubbish dumps make archaeologists jump up and down because they provide such an absolute wealth of information. And a lot of the material that we're going to look at today it is possibly came from the rubbish dumps. The rubbish dump here, the big pit, we'll look at the big pit shortly, and rubbish that built up at the foot of the enclosure here. And this material really provides us with great snippets of daily life. So we are going to try and look at a variety of evidence. We can think of it as the official record, for example, stele, and the unofficial record, where we can think of this as Ostraca and figurines, and we'll try and pull together all this material for us to try and get close to the women of the village. As I said, the big pit here, this was probably dug in the Ramesside era in an abortive attempt to get to the water table. And then over time, it becomes filled with debris. It's also likely that in the Ptolemaic time, when the temple was being cleared out, objects were also thrown into the big pit. But this provides just such an absolute wealth of information. The site of Deir el-Medina was excavated predominantly by Bernard Deir for the French Institute of Oriental Archaeology. And he excavated the site for 28 seasons. It was his life's work. And he believed that the material he found from the big pit was the best thing that he found in the entire village. And that's because it provided information, that these gleamings of daily life that are just not accessible anywhere else. And it's predominantly Ostraca that he is talking about. And Ostraca we'll contemplate, hang on, we'll have a quick look, sorry. Ostraca. There's two forms of Ostraca. Limestone chippings, and these are likely to have come from the tombs that the workmen were actually creating. So if we think of them hacking out of the tomb, so these are a readily available source material, and they can be used to write notes, predominantly in hieratic, and they also have images on, so they're called the figured Ostraca. And we're going to be having a look at a variety of images that are on the figured Ostraca, and they provide us with some of the most individual representations of women that we have from the site, and they are very much an example of regional art. Most of the Ostraca are about the size of the palm of my hand. This particular one is probably about the size of my whole hand. And this, of course, means that they are mobile, and they are predominantly drawn in outline and have coloured fill, and that they generally make most use of black and ochre. So if we have a look at this, we can see that this is quite a substantial piece. And they really, for me, that they bridge the gap between 2- and 3-dimensional imagery, because clearly we have a 2-dimensional image, but it's on a 3-dimensional object, and this could indeed be stood up, that this could act as a small scale stele. So that's one sort of Ostraca, is the limestone from the tombs, or indeed from the foothills of the Theban hills. But either way, they are a readily available source material, and they provide wonderful images and texts. The other type of Ostraca is fragments of pots, and you can see this one on the bevel here, and these are more porous, so we don't tend to get as elaborate images on these because they don't provide as good a surface to draw on. The ancient Egyptians did refer to these Ostraca, and that they gave them a name of a splinter, a break, or a shard. So it's a fragment, but sometimes they do indeed have whole images on them. So we are going to be trying to look at official and what I'm calling unofficial material culture to piece together the lives of the women of the village. Now, the women of the village are, of course, dependent on the men, that they are there by the nature of their men folks' occupation. The village, there's two main sorts of workmen. You're either an artisan or a stone mason, and we can see this beautiful image of a stone mason here, and he is indeed hacking out a tomb. So we also have degrees of personnel. So we have administrators, we have foremen, and we have deputies, because the workmen are split into two gangs, and we also have scribes. The work that the village evolves over time. It isn't static. And the village was probably abandoned during the Amarna period, and then the workmen return. And we can see that we have varying levels of personnel. But the women are fundamentally economically dependent on the men. We do have textual evidence, which is predominantly hieratic on Ostraca, which talk about the women commissioning linen, so weaving. And weaving would be the main way that women could make any independent cash for themselves. Well, not cash, obviously, it's a barter economy. But that actually stands true for outside the village. Weaving would be the main way that women could engage in the economy. So we have the fact that women could weave. There is one Ostraca which also talks about a woman being paid as a wet nurse, but predominantly women are going to be economically dependent on their menfolk. The concept of marriage, there is no real legal transaction of a marriage. There's no ceremony. We have text, again, fragments on Ostraca, which talk about women taking a bundle. So the concept is that you would just move in with somebody. It's very much about the status just being seen and being recognised, so that there is no official marriage ceremony. With divorce, either party could bring about divorce. But again, it's about a public declaration. So you would swear an oath at a local court. Now, in theory, men and women are both legally equal, and both men or women could bring about a divorce. However, women who bring about the divorce, they can take with them a third of their joint property, unless that they are responsible for the divorce. If they are seen to have committed adultery, they do not take their third. They can take any money, sorry, I keep saying money, they can take any wealth that they bring into a marriage, for example, that they might have inherited. But the amount that they might have inherited is probably going to be minimal. So women are unlikely to bring about a divorce, because it is going to put them in rather a perilous situation. There is text which talks about one father. He's writing to his daughter, and he says that if the workman throws her out, she can live in his hut. The workmen, in addition to houses, that they had huts and sheds, and often women would inherit a hut. So that might have been seen to be a fallback position, so to speak. There's also text which talk about for example, one charitable workman who gives a portion of his grain to a woman who has been divorced. So fundamentally, we can see that women are at the peril, really, of their relationship with their husband, and that's why when women talk about divorce, that the words that they use are to throw out or to go away. So this is not something that women would do lightly, because that they are dependent on their relationship with their husband. So if we go back to our Ostraca, we are going to be looking at some images of women that we see on these Ostraca, and that they are really a unique source of data. And we've already talked about the two different types. They are predominantly limestone. The images on the pieces of broken pot are much smaller. That the limestone images are much more common. And it's not just images of women that we find on Ostraca. There's also images of animal parody, and there are votive images which contain text and a dedication to God. But for our purposes us this evening, it's the images of women that I want to have a look at. And there's two main types of these images. They were called Scènes de Gyngécées by Van der Dabede, the French scholar who recorded and catalogued these. And this Scènes de Gyngécées is really scenes of what she's referring to as the women's quarter. And she describes them as images of women of quality, whether we agree with that or not. I divided these images into two main types, and we have what I described as images of women on beds. And these are these are inside. These are in a domestic setting, and they are a unique source of data, because what we see in these scenes is we see that women are the main protagonists. And in Egyptian art, women tend to appear as somebody's wife, somebody's mother, or somebody's sister. But here, the scene is all about the women. The only men that appear are servants, and we only have one or two representations of them at all. So that is an absolutely unique form of representation. And it's interesting that it's on the Ostraca, which are this readily available source material. We don't see these images in tombs, and we don't see them in temples. So it's likely that these scenes were created by the workmen of Deir el-Medina for their own purposes. We have no evidence of female artisans, which is why I am saying that the workmen created these. It would be fantastic if we found some definitive evidence of a female artisan, but unfortunately we don't have any. But we can see, we see the one woman is sat on a bed, and her companion is approaching her. They are dressed in a similar style, which suggests that they are friends or they are relatives. We do not have a status differentiation. That this is not a servant approaching her mistress, and that the scenes are actually incredibly touching. They are making hand and eye contact, and the image, they are actually mirroring each other, because in the background we have these two beautiful representations of convolvulus leaves. And here we have a representation of the god Bes, and we can see the sitting lady has her feet on a stool. So she is in the elevated and the more superior position, because she is receiving her guest, but they are of similar status. So these are the main types of image that I found when I was researching images of women from Deir el-Medina. The images of the women in kiosks over here, these are much smaller data set. There is actually only 3 of these scenes that I found in their entirety. But we can see the woman here is very probably sitting in a temporary structure. So she's outside, but we can see the link because we've got the convolvulus leaves. This is a wonderful scene because we've actually got a register here, but the 2 images are thematically linked by the convolvulus leaves, and we can see that there is a servant here, and he is offering a mirror and a coal pot here. But we'll talk more about the meaning of these scenes as we go on. But we can see that there is a difference, as the lady here is predominantly undressed. She has a cape or shawl around her shoulders, and she is breastfeeding a child. Also, we have the iconographical difference that this scene is purely in black and outline, while we have a degree of colour fill here. That this is quite an accomplished scene. There is only a handful of these ostraca which actually have any context. This is a wonderful example because it was found in a tomb. So this suggests that it had a use, a purpose in daily life, and then it was taken into the afterlife. We have here a group scene. So we've got the most important lady receiving her guests. Again, she's on her footstool. Her friend or her kin is offering her a bowl or a dish here. They're all similarly attired in these complex wraparound dresses, which are common attire from the Ramesside era, and they all have an enveloping, or at least enveloping and tripartite. They have elaborate wigs, so they are dressed for their festival best. We can even see part of a broad collar here, and they all have headbands and lotus flowers attached. It's suggested that this lady may be actually doing the hair of her seated companion. That's something that we can have a think about later. This is incredibly fragmentary, this piece now. This is a fantastic example because this has been relatively recently found by a Swedish team in the workmen's huts. And these are the huts that are in between the Valley of the Kings and the village. And it's likely that the workmen stayed here during the week and then went back to the village at the weekend. The ancient Egyptian week was 10 days. So this would have meant they didn't have to keep carrying their tools and their equipment to and from the village. So it's wonderful to think that this ostracon was drawn by a workman in his hut while he was away from home. Was this a gift for his wife? Is this a rendition of his wife? We can see we have again a bed, possibly a child here. We've still got convolvulus leaves. This is a much more schematic representation, but that's what I want us to think about. We've got the same scene, and we'll see we have degrees of artistic skill. This is quite rudimentary, but we've got the same concepts, and we've got clearly an emphasis here on the hair, on a wig. This is a potsherd. As I said, these are much rarer, but we have again an image of a woman lying on, possibly lying on a bed. This is the actually the footrest, as Egyptian beds don't have a headboard, they have a footrest. But this is found in a house. I'm not a great fan of lists on PowerPoint and Zoom talks. What I want us to take from this is that when I was researching these images of women on beds, I found 56 examples of these, and all provenanced examples come from Deir el-Medina. So I had 11 examples in my data set that I didn't have a provenance for, but it's highly likely that they come from Deir el-Medina. So this adds another dimension to these images, in the sense that not only are they a unique set of images, that they are an example of regional art. They are also intriguing because they have no text. in an ideal world, Egyptian art, iconography, would have a painted and an inscribed image, but here we don't have text. And is that because the image of the woman, is that because it is known to the artist and it is known to the recipient, so we don't need text. We know, because the person that's drawn this has then given this ostracon to the woman. Is it perhaps because women cannot read, or at least that there is lower levels of literacy in women? There are some ostraca from Deir el-Medina which suggests that some women in the village had a degree of literacy, but on the whole, the evidence is that there are more men literate in the village than outside the village, but that the number of women that could read to a significant degree is quite limited. So the images have a number of unique traits to them. We can see in this example, we often have an array of objects placed beneath the bed. We've got the beautiful image of Bess incorporated into the bed legs. We have a mirror and a coal pot, and if you remember, that links in to the image we saw of the kiosk scene. So there are links between the two data sets that I identified, the women on the beds and the kiosk scenes. The kiosks, as I said, there are actually only 3 of them, and we will talk more about the kiosks later, but their imagery is very consistent. Again, we have a lady in a temporary structure. We can see we've got these beautiful convolvulus leaves, and we have a servant who is offering her a mirror and a coal pot. And I am using the term servant here because we can see that the female is naked, and nudity is very much a status indicator in ancient Egypt. We can see the lady again is breastfeeding, and she has a cape or a shawl around her shoulders. But we can see that this piece has been constructed in a different manner, because we do have a high degree of colour fill. The colours themselves are quite unusual, with this this yellow skin and this heavy ochre outline, and we can see both their hairstyles are distinct from the images of the ladies on the beds, which are wearing the enveloping or the tripartite. We have this very unusual hairstyle, which we will talk about later. So these may be temporary structures. Whether they were set up in the village is debatable. If we think about the incredibly dense nature of the village, those of you who visited will know that the houses are really tightly packed inside the enclosure. What I found when I deconstructed the images, when I looked at the individual components, was that 17 of my images included a child, and we can see a beautiful image of a boy child here. Now, I divided the images into complete and to incomplete scenes, and a complete scene I identified as including both ends of the bed, because of course by their nature these ostraca are fragmentary. So when I'm trying to understand if they contained a child, it's highly likely that the fragments I have do not include the entire scene. So I actually only had 12 complete scenes that included both ends of the bed, and only 4 of these did not include a child. So it's highly likely that these images, when they were originally created, most of them included a child. So we would have a woman sitting on a bed with a child, most of them in front of her. And again, we can see we have objects placed under the bed. This is no doubt a mirror, but we've got beautiful dot here. Is this evoking the sun? And then we have these papyri columns. It's highly likely that here we would have an image of a coal pot, because we see, well, rather a coal applicator. We see the mirror and the coal applicator depicted numerous times. And again, we can see on this particular example that we've just got outline. But this is beautiful. This is almost suggesting a plump cushion where the lady is sitting with the child in front of her. Now this is probably the most aesthetically pleasing of these images, and it's wonderful because we have an image of a highly decorated interior. We have broad collars here, and we have convolvulus sleeves. Now, these decoration could be real. We could have here scenes which are showing that this room is gaily decked with flowers. And that's quite common. Think of our own festivities. At Christmas, we bring a tree in, we have holly, we have fern. And it's the same with the convolvulus. The convolvulus and the floral collars could be real decoration that is brought in, or it could be painted decoration. When Petrie was excavating Amarna, he found evidence of painted collars on the houses there. He also found evidence of convolvulus leaves painted, wrapped around columns in the palace. So it's actually impossible to tell if this decoration is real floral decoration, or if it is a painted wall. But either way, it's showing that this room is gaily decked, possibly for a celebration. It's likely that this is also a floral collar. Again, we have got the god Bes, and we have a motif here on the bed, which is highly likely to be a serpent, and we'll see clearer images of this. So we have here the only images of the gods are on the bed. It's very possible that this serpent is reference to Merit Saga, the Theban goddess of the mountainside, she who loves silence. But we can see the woman here is elaborately dressed, beautiful complex wraparound dress, tied under the bust here, and we can even see the edge of the dress here. She's holding a dish. It's very probable that there would have been a companion here standing in front of her who was offering a tall vase, and it's likely that there would have been a child. So that's why I divided the scenes into complete and incomplete scenes, so we could try and think about what this would have looked like in its entirety. And we can see that this is really quite an accomplished scene. So the concept of these beds with Bes legs, it is likely that these did actually exist in the village. Deir, in his publication of the village, published this image. Now, Deir doesn't say where he found them on the site, Now that suggests that he bought them. Now excavators were commonly doing this when objects from their excavation were stolen, and then they end up in the hands of local antique dealers. So he possibly has bought these back. The clearance of the village, it is quite shocking to think about it now, but the village was cleared in one season, and it had hundreds of workers. So Deir does not always note in great detail where he finds a piece. He tends to just note the house he finds it in. We don't tend to get the room or the individual context, but he is a highly accomplished excavator, and he publishes his reports yearly. So the fact that he hasn't noted what house he found these in suggests that he did buy them. But it is highly likely that they were from Deir el-Medina. They're now in Brussels in their register as probably from Deir el-Medina. There are some fantastic examples at Leiden. And Martin Raven has written an excellent study of these. When these examples came into Leiden Museum, he wanted to do research and find out more about them. And in his study, he found that there are 13 examples of these, and that they've all been bought on the art market. And we can see that they have been cut off at their heads here, but it is highly likely that these were originally attached to what we can think of as a bed. Around the reverse of the Beds figures, there is in fact a socket where there is plaster, so it's likely that these were attached to something. They are curious objects because they are in pristine condition. Now that would normally suggest that they were placed in a tomb, but Deir does not note finding any of these in a tomb. It is likely that these beds would be passed on from generation to generation. And it's possible that they would be dismantled when not in use. But it is intriguing that the archaeological record for them really does not tell us where they came from on the site. But they are fantastic objects, and we can imagine how elaborate this bed would be. Sorry, just go back to the bed a moment. There is textual evidence. Janssen wrote a fantastic study about economic transactions in the village, and in his study, he finds that there are references to the commissioning and the decoration of what he refers to as women's beds, and this. The beds are more expensive than a standard bed, and it's the decoration that is the added value to them. The texts talk about recompense for decorating a woman's bed. Other text which talk about women buying beds or a bed for a woman don't refer to this. So this is quite distinct. These decorated beds are being referred to as women's beds, and they are more expensive than your standard bed. So one of the most common themes in these images of the ladies on the beds is this concept of gift giving. And we can see here we have one lady sitting on a bed while her friend, her companion, is offering a small bowl and a vase. Very occasionally we have this mutual gift giving, and we can see this fragmentary piece here. We can see the seated lady is holding a vase while her companion is offering a lotus flower. So we have these wonderful images which are showing women dressed in their finery in a highly decorated environment, who are exchanging small gifts. And Janssen has suggested that this might be part of festivities and festivities in the home where everybody brings a gift. If we think about, Janssen calls it primitive societies, but in many cultures, the only way you can have a large party, a large celebration, is if everybody contributes. So here, what we have is images of celebrations in the home where the women are bringing together small gifts. The texts the texts that we will consider talk about food and gift items. The images on the ostraca show mainly vases and bowls. There are a number of cones, also floral collars and mirrors. So we have an array of items offered between the ladies. But these are what Janssen was studying, hieratic ostraca. So these are the sort of things that Deir was in raptures about, these snippets of daily life. And he found what he called these gift-giving lists. And the most remarkable thing about them is that they are a long list of people, and they are the majority of which are women. And against the name of a person, there is almost an inventory of items, mainly food, so bread and cake and meats, but also small items, small gift items. And this is what led Janssen to believe that these were records of gift giving. So this is recording one instance. So we can imagine somebody at this celebration is noting down who arrived and what they brought. So they'd be saying, Arthur brought 10 jars of beer and 4 fish, while Marie brought a small jar of oil. Now, so this is so that when Arthur and Marie return the favour and go to their neighbour's party, they will be expecting a similar amount of items. So it's keeping a tally of who brought what, so that when you go, you know how much that you need to take to your neighbours' parties. So these lists that Janssen records are recording one instance and people who arrive. There is a separate set of lists which actually are written from the giver's point of view. So they would have me, Joanne, and they would note what I gave at multiple instances. So that they would record maybe 4 or 5 times I have given gifts to different people. So that clearly would be for me as an aid memoir, so that I would know what I needed, what I would expect back in return. So that they are fascinating lists, and it's perhaps the images on the ostraca are perhaps a visual a visual companion to the gift giving lists. So we are seeing these celebrations in the home, very likely to mark the birth of a child, if we think that the key feature of these images of the women on the beds is that a child is present, or at least would have been present in most of the complete scenes. So we are seeing that these images, which are predominantly secular celebrations in the home, and they are focusing on the women of the village. Men do appear in these lists, but it is predominantly women. The research of the gift-giving lists was continued, and Heidi wrote her PhD about these. Well, not just about these. She was actually looking at images of feasting and festivals. So she carried on the work of Janssen. But it is wonderful if we look at these scenes now and think about them as possibly showing these images of celebrations in the home. Beautiful image, lady sitting on a bed here, and we can see her friend or maybe a relative is offering her a tall vase and a bowl. Is this smoke? Is this some sort of hot food, or is it something being burned? Is it incense? But we can see they are dressed in a similar attire, and again they are very touching because we have this concept of their feet coming together here. This is a personal favorite of mine. We can see we have this lady who is presenting and very possibly going to put this collar on her seated companion. And again, we've got the mirror and the coal pot underneath the bed, and they link in very much with the kiosk scenes. So these are the two best preserved kiosk scenes, and we can see that there is a great similarity between them, even though that they have been created visually in very different styles. Now, it was suggested by Brunner Traut, the German scholar who studied these, that this is a birthing pavilion. This is a place that women actually potentially gave birth in, or more likely was a place of confinement. So after they'd had the child, we know from the Westcar papyri that women would have a period of confinement, ideally for 14 days. How many women actually did take this period of confinement? We obviously have no way of knowing. So Brunner Traut suggested that these were either a place women gave birth in, or a place that they had a period of confinement. I'm not convinced that you would set up a temporary kiosk like this in the village. I think that they may actually be evoking images that we see of Isis or Hathor in the papyri marshes protecting the child Horus. So they may be being depicted to place the child under the protection of a goddess. It is possible that they are also referring to perhaps ceremonies that were taken place in the home after the child has born, almost to welcome the woman back into her normal life. And it's suggested that that's what the mirror and the coal pot is for. So after her period of confinement, this is about making herself beautiful and presentable for her return into the village. Now, the mirror is actually a highly significant object in ancient Egypt. The word for mirror means ankh, and it has great connotations of rebirth associated very much with the sun. In tomb scenes of the New Kingdom, the mirror appears below the chair of married women, predominantly either the mother or the wife of the tomb owner. So it is possible that these objects do indeed have are highly charged with symbolism, and they of course, as I said, also appear under the bed in the women on beds scenes. So it is possible that the women on bed scenes also include the concept of a wish for a child, and also possibly connotations of rebirth, because the ancient Egyptians, we know, link birth very much to rebirth, and we did see one of the women on bed scenes was found in a tomb. So it is possible that these images have multiple levels of meaning, which is common in Egyptian art. The very distinctive hairstyle that we see on the kiosk is found on a handful of figurines. Brunner Trout believed that this was a hairstyle that women wore, particularly when they were giving birth. She actually suggests that this is a frame that your hair would be stretched upon. I'm not personally convinced in that, but it is certainly used as a status indicator, clearly denoting this concept of a nursing mother. We can really think perhaps that the wig, if we're thinking that it is a wig, is depicted frontally while the woman is drawn in profile. The figurines that do have a similar hairstyle, unfortunately, none of them include a child. So that's something really to think about. So it has been suggested that the images on the Ostraca may have been practice pieces for images on the lit clos. Lit clos, so called by Deir, the word really means a closed bed. Deir named them after beds he had seen in Brittany, which actually have no relevance really to Deir el-Medina whatsoever, but the name has stuck. These are mud brick structures which are whitewashed. They are fully or partially enclosed, and they have a series of steps, but the steps are very precarious, and I'm not sure how much practical use they would be. The only painted decoration that has survived in the village has survived on the lit clos. There has been much debate about the function of these. Deir had a variety of theories. He thought they may be places women went to give birth. He thought they may be places where you slept in and you had dreams and prophecies. He thought they may be almost like a shrine of a goddess. Scholars now really believe that these are household altars, because similar structures have been found at Amarna. I think it's highly unlikely anybody would wish to go inside one of these to give birth, if we think that women gave birth standing on bricks, and the limited evidence that we have suggests you would have an attendant either side of you, perhaps one in front of you, one behind you. It's highly unlikely that you would go inside one of these structures to give birth. They are much more likely to be household altars in the first room of the house. This is a reconstructed one. I'm sure many of you have peered over the wall at Deir el-Medina, as I did, to take this picture. We can see that they take up a significant portion of the first room of the house. So they are clearly a very important structure. They only appear in the Ramesside time period. The first, the earlier part of the village in the 18th dynasty, the lit clos, there is no evidence of them. They are very much a Ramesside addition to the houses, because the houses evolve over time. This, of course, is the image that Anne was looking at last week, and this is the largest example of painted decoration that has survived in the village, and it's on the foot end of a lee clo. And we can see that there are a number of similarities to the images on the Ostraca. We have these beautiful convolvulus sleeves. We have a cape or a shawl that we saw as being very similar to the imageries we saw on the kiosk scenes. So we can see some similarity between the images on the Ostraca and on the lee clo. This is as it survives now. We can see it has lost some of its paint, but it is still vibrantly decorated. It is covered in the village now. It looks almost like a gas meter, so it is safely protected. The closest in images on the Ostraca is this beautiful ostracon, which shows a lady. We can see she is also playing the double flute, and she is wearing this cape or shawl. It is a wonderful image, and this is why the Ostraca are such a fascinating source of data. Right, that is telling me it's 7 o'clock, but I still have a few things to talk about, so I hope you don't mind and you are going to bear with me. This is another example of an ostracon, which shows what I believe to be a lady of the house making music. It is a fantastic scene because she is fully dressed in her complex wraparound robe. This is quite different from the lady here, who does indeed appear to be naked, apart from the cape or the shawl. So wonderful scene. Perhaps this lady is making music in a household celebration that we have just looked at. This is another ostracon that I think Anne looked at a similar example. In fact, she might have looked at the reverse of this, as there is a practice piece on the back of this. I just wanted to show a very different image of a dancer. This fits in with what Anne was looking at last week, because she was looking at the evidence of tattoos, and we can see that this dancer has these beautiful dots on her thigh here, which very well could be depicting tattooing. She's wearing a small leather kilt. Examples of this have been found that they have holes punched in it. But this type of image is very different than these images, because there is examples of dances of this type. We see on Hatshepsut's Red Chapel, and we see in Luxor Temple. So these are very much images that we see women taking part in religious festivals, while these images are much more likely to be images of women taking part in music and dance, perhaps in the home. Just to go back to the concept of the Ostraca and the lee clo. Lynn Mescal suggested that the first room of the house was the room that what was predominantly the room that the married women used. She divided the house up really. She saw it as sexed space, and she saw the women predominantly being focused in the first room of the house, while the elite men were in the second room of the house, as there are a number of divans there. I'm not quite sure that we can divide the house up in such a systematic manner, but it is quite clear that there is a huge amount of female orientated decoration. If we, the second best example of painted decoration, we can see it is very fragmentary. It's here on the Lee-Clow. And we can see with a series of feet and a stool and a column. And this is how Deir reconstructed it. This, of course, is very similar to the kiosk scenes that we have looked at. Now, Deir reconstructed this before the images of the kiosks were found on the Ostraca. So the concept of this being Hathor is not one that we would necessarily hold true today. The significant thing is that Deir believed that the image was not of a mortal woman. He believed it was of a goddess, and the function of the image was to place the child under the protection of the goddess. He originally believed it was Hathor, then he thought it might be Isis, then he thought it might be Merit Saga. There's very little evidence of Isis at Deir el-Medina. It's much more likely to be Hathor or Merit Saga. It's been reconstructed by Brunner Trout, which I think is a much more realistic rendition of these of the Ostraca, and we can see it's very similar to the kiosk scene. So this will be fantastic. This painted decoration in the first room of the house. The Lee-Clow, the most common image on the Lee-Clow that has survived is the god Bes. Bes was, of course, a god who protects women and children and creates a safe space in the home. And this, of course, ties in with the images that we looked at on the ladies on beds, the elaborate beds with the Bes feet. So can we imagine how fantastic this would be in our first room of our house if we have these elaborately decorated, and then we have these women's beds with the images of Merit Saga and also Bes protecting the women and children. So just to contemplate and to think of the function of these. Why were these drawn? I believe that these were drawn really to act almost as small scale stelae. So you could place these in the home, perhaps around the Lee-Clow. It would mark the birth of a child. It may also have some protective capacity, and that's why we've got the rendition of the god Bes. Convolvulus leaves are associated very much with the goddess Hathor, because in numerous tomb scenes, Ramesside tomb scenes are jam-packed with convolvulus leaves, and they are often wrapped with papyri, and the papyri flower is very much associated with Hathor. So these may have been drawn as markers of the birth of a child, to commemorate the birth of a child, and to place the women and the children under the protection of the god Bes and also Merit Saga. We can just see a swirly line here on the bed. The kiosks. The kiosk scenes. This is the third of the kiosk scenes, which hasn't survived nearly as well. Wonderful image. We can see the lady here is sitting again. This is very probably on a palm trunk, and she is breastfeeding a child. She's got the same cape or shawl, and we can just make out the same very distinctive wig or frame, however we wish to view the hairstyle. And we can see there is a servant in front of her. Now, this is the only example of the Ostraca which contain any text. Now, I've handled this ostracon, and you cannot make the text out now, but when Deir records it, and Van der Dabberday, they note that the text says to give beautiful plants and flowers, offerings of the garden and fields alike. And we can indeed see the convolvulus leaves, which is why this is really being catalogued as a kiosk scene. So it is likely that there would have been a kiosk here, and we can see we have this image of a servant here. I believe the servant would be offering a mirror and a coal pot, even though the text talks about giving flowers and plants. But quite significantly, we have this little figure here. And this little figure looks as if they are washing the feet of the feeding mother. So is this part of these ceremonies to welcome the woman back into the home after her period of confinement? The mirror and the coal pots suggesting beautification, and indeed the washing of the feet here. They are an intriguing source of data, and I did and was going to talk about their comparison to the figurines found at the site, but I think I will probably be out of time now. So I always have too much to say. I'm very sorry. I will just say that when Deir excavated Deir el-Medina, he found hundreds of fragments of female figurines in the village. When I carried out my research, I traced them to the Louvre, to IFO, the French Institute of Archaeology, and Turin. They're all due to their excavation history, excavated by Schiaparelli and Deir. But there is new research being undertaken by IFO, and they tell me that they have over 1,000 fragments of figurines from Deir el-Medina, and as many as 160 of the very elaborate ladies on beds figurines. So perhaps we can talk about the figurines at another time, but the suggestion is that the figurines were used in worship around the Liclo. So we have to imagine this incredibly powerfully charged first room of the house with all this female imagery, the imagery on the Ostraca, the elaborate bed, the Liclo, and then possibly the figurines around the Liclo. So I will stop there.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Jo. I was going to ask you about the figurines. I mean, how much more have you got? Because I'm sure people would be up for you doing a bit more on that. Or
I'm always happy to talk about Deir el-Medina and women. I'm happy to carry on. Shall I carry on for a bit, and then if anyone wants to go, they can go?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, folks. Right. Yes, again, I'm not a big fan of charts. It's just to tell you that there is a huge variety of material, and there is. I divided them into two distinct types of figurine, handmade and molded, and these are handmade. These beautiful plaques. And we can see we've got a highly schematic representation. We've got the breasts and we've got the pubic region here. Deir, when he when he records Deir el-Medina and the figurines, he says that he finds most of them in the village, but he doesn't give any definitive find spots except for one, and it's a plaque figurine which he found in a house. So we can see highly schematic representation of the female form. Again, we're still on the handmade. I call these applied and incised decoration, and these are fantastic. These are some of the most unique representations of women that we have from ancient Egypt. It's highly unusual to have a figurine which depicts a mortal pregnant female. Pregnancy is such a dangerous time. It is hardly ever depicted. And there's a handful of these from Deir el-Medina which do depict without a doubt a pregnant female. Now, these tie in again with the concept of the decorated body. We're still in the applied and incised decoration, and these really, again, are unique images. Some of the figurines from Deir el-Medina are standard types that we see from other sites. And some, particularly the applied and incised decoration, are unique. I have never come across any other representations of the female form in this manner. They may not be that aesthetically pleasing, but they are fantastic. Are these denoting a decorated body? We obviously get much more individuality in the handmade figurines than we do the molded figurines, because there is much more standardization here. And the ladies on beds figurines, these are much, as you can see, these are much larger and they are much more formalized. We tend to see the lady lying on a bed, often with a child, but the bed itself is used as a medium for decoration, because here we have got the mirror, and we've just talked about how important the concept of the mirror is. And in fact, the mirror is something that I'm hoping to do a session in the autumn for, because the mirror, there's so much to say about the mirror. But we can see these are molded. Now, Deir, he says he finds molds in the village, but I have not come across any images of the molds. But Deir says he finds molds, but no kilns. So we can't say for sure if these are made on site. But these are the most decorated examples of ladies on beds figurines. We find ladies on beds figurines from other sites in the New Kingdom, predominantly settlement sites, but the Deir el-Medina examples are the most elaborately decorated. We can see the lady is wearing a head cone, a headband, and a highly elaborate wig, very similar to the images we saw of the ladies sitting on the decorated beds, except of course the lady is naked. I included this example because I'm not convinced, but perhaps there is some decoration on her thigh here, which might denote a best tattoo. How fantastic would that be? I also, when I was handling these figurines, there are two fragmentary examples which might have incision on their thigh, which might denote a best tattoo. This, of course, ties in with what Anne was talking about last week when she was looking, not last week, it was a fortnight ago, when she was suggesting that she had found the fragments of a best tattoo on an actual mummy. That would be fantastic. So these lady on beds figurines, we can see here this wonderful representation of very probably a serpent. And if we look we can see the link between the ladies on beds figurines and the Ostraca. And that's why I believe that this is denoting Merit Saga, she who loves silence, the goddess very much of the necropoli. And this shows the link very much between the ladies on beds figurines and the Ostraca. When I actually began my research, I started out looking at the figurines, but then I started to look at the Ostraca as comparative evidence, and I actually shifted the main focus of my study to the Ostraca because they are such a unique source of data. We can see here lady sitting on the bed with the child, and the best footrest here. So the figurines, as I said, I divided them into two types: the handmade figurines and the molded figurines. And I believed that the handmade figurines, if we go back to them, these type of figurines could very well have been used for what we might think of as medical religious practice. They are just the right size to be held. They are very tactile. They have no facial features, these particular examples. They have a clear emphasis on the sexual features of the female form. They could be used in a concept of what we can think of as like for like. So you are wanting a child, so you create a figurine showing a pregnant woman. Or they could be used to prevent miscarriage, to see a pregnancy through. They're very much a wish. While the ladies on beds figurines, these are much more likely to be made for display. If we look at the size of these are really quite substantial objects. You couldn't be holding one of these. This has been made for display. So these very well could be displayed around the Liclo. In the houses at Deir el-Medina, there were niches in the walls, and it is quite possible that these figurines will be displayed in the niches. Deir also found at the site standalone figurines and model beds. So the standalone figurine could be placed on the model bed. They're quite difficult to identify in the archaeological record because many of the model beds are broken, and excavators did not necessarily at the time know that they were looking at model beds because they're just little fragments about this big. But these are much more highly decorated. So it's likely that these were used for display. So they could be placed around the Liclo. They could be offered to ancestors or gods in the wish for a child. Very often they incorporate a child, but they also could be taken to the tomb. Deir did record examples of the standalone figurines and the model beds in tombs. So these might have had a dual purpose, the concept of a wish for a child in this life, and you're asking the ancestors to intercede for you, or indeed the gods. And then you can take the figurine to the tomb, because the Egyptians have this concept of this link between birth and rebirth. Ancestor cult was one of the main forms of worship at Deir el-Medina, and I did indeed have a whole array of material about ancestor cult. But it is likely that ancestors are venerated in the home. So these are a very different and a more substantial type of object than these, which could be, you could hold this, You could say what we can think of as a spell, but the Egyptians might very well think of it as a prayer. You can hold these, you can say something, you can do something, and they are incorporating a wish. These are much more likely to be displayed and very probably around the Liclo, if we think of that as a household altar. So it is the evidence from Deir el-Medina of women is very much more of the unofficial record, the figurines and the Ostraca. They do appear on a limited number of stelae, and of course I'm sure you're all very much familiar with their images in tombs, but in tombs they often appear purely as somebody's wife, somebody's mother, somebody's sister. But this the unofficial record shows us that they had celebrations in the home to celebrate the birth of a child, and that they may have been active in the home in worshipping ancestors, in the veneration of ancestors, incorporating the wish for a child. But the link, for me, the link between the 2 and the 3-dimensional imagery is really quite fantastic. And we really, some of the Ostraca are really very accomplished. This is beautiful, beautiful, smooth surface. It's such a shame that we only have a small fragment of it, but I think we can imagine that displayed as a small scale stele in the home. Right, I think I probably should stop.
That was so good. I have like I mean, it was so interesting. I've got so many questions, and there's a few questions I've seen come up in the chat box there as well. But one thing I wanted to ask you, actually, it just popped into my head. Do you think that any of those very simple sculptures could have been made by children? Because you know, children do tend to like to make things out of clay, and I wonder whether it might have been one of the activities that children would have been given. Is there any evidence of children making stuff?
There's no evidence of children making things, but there's no reason why they couldn't. And you know, as you said, children, particularly for me, the handmade figurines are the most fascinating. And it's also that the Egyptians have you know, it's the concept, the power of touch. So if you're molding something out of clay, you're creating something out of clay. It's very much your wish fulfilled, particularly with the pregnancy images. But yeah, the more rudimentary ones with the dots all over, yeah, there's no reason why children couldn't. But we have very little evidence of children crafting, but there's very little evidence of women crafting. I'd so love to find some definitive evidence of, you know, of a woman craftsperson, but there isn't any.
Yeah. One of the other questions I was going to ask you is a lot of what you were talking about there with this idea, not necessarily of the birthing pavilion, but of this sacred space, reminded me of the idea of the Beds chambers at Saqqara. Yeah. And Beds being related to kind of fertility dreams and incubation potentially there. So do you think that perhaps that was something they were trying to draw in, that aspect of Beds? Because in the Saqqara chambers, I think he's often represented with a large phallus, and sometimes in those chambers there's like a hollow where a phallus is placed into it.
The only thing is that they are a lot later than the Deir el-Medina material. The phallic concept, what's very interesting about Deir el-Medina is that I didn't include it because I knew we'd be pushed for time. But in addition to the plaques, there are models of female genitalia, which is why it is very much about fertility and procreation. But we have hardly any phallic objects from Deir el-Medina. There's maybe 2 or 3, while there is a multitude of representations of the female form, you know, on the beds, the naked female form, and the little figurines, the plaques, and the female genitalia. The emphasis is very much on the female, as opposed to the phallic. Whether they were trying to draw in Bess in a dream capacity, Briere did think that. He thought that the liclow could be used for dreams and for prophecies. But as the ancient Egyptians don't write, they don't talk about the liclow. They don't tell us, that they didn't call it a liclow. That they don't tell us what they used it for. We've got no definitive evidence. The only thing you can say for sure is that similar examples have been found in Amarna and in the and at Malkata. So it is likely it's an altar. But my problem with the concept of the sex space is the fact that space is really tight in these houses. Whether you'd have the luxury to say, right, the first room of the house is for women, the second room of the house is for men, I'm not convinced, because you might also have a few animals wandering around in there. So your concept of the dream is quite possible, because you might, it's not necessary that you'd be sleeping inside the liclow, because I don't think that would be possible, but the best decoration on the liclow is in the front room of the house. So people could be sleeping there. They could be sleeping anywhere. Yeah,
I mean, I do think of somewhere to sleep when I see those bed decorations, especially on corners or on bed decoration in some way. But let me have a look through these questions here, because I don't want to miss out anyone else's question. Oh, who was it that Susan brought up, whether you think that this may be a precursor to the Sabu ritual of birth that still is practiced by Coptic Christians in Egypt today, and is, I think it means the 7th, 7 days after the birth of the child, there's these special rituals about birth.
Gosh, I'm not familiar with that, but that would be fascinating. That would be fascinating if it was. I mean, the only evidence that we have of the actual period of confinement is the Westcott Papyrus, which talks about 14 days. But whether women actually had the luxury of this period of confinement, we don't know. But it certainly looks like, from the images on the Ostraca, that the birth of a child was marked. And it's not necessarily the birth of the child that's being drawn, it's the celebration. So it could be once that the child is of an age when they're deemed to be out of danger. So, the 7 days or whenever, when the woman's come back into her normal daily life.
Yeah, I think El Sabu is about that period of time as well, whereby you differentiate the genders, and they come from the neutral space into the differentiated space.
Oh, look at that sounds fascinating.
And Susan's written here, it involves various rituals to strengthen the baby and keep away evil. And it's supposed to, apparently goes back a very long time as well. And I mean, I think if it's practiced by the Coptics as well, that's promising. But then some Muslim families also practice it as well.
I mean, obviously it's completely out of our time zone, but if we think of the ivory wands that we have from the Middle Kingdom, and that they have early images of a deity that's likely to become Bess, and their text, when they have text on them, they talk about protection by day, protection by night. So it's quite clear that Bess is this protective deity. And if we think that those wands might have been used to create a safe space, because the ends of them, many of them show signs of wear. So perhaps the bed is a development on from Bess is creating this safe space for the women and the children, and it's only used at a set period in time, and then it's dismantled. It's also the space element. So that I'm sure we've all peered over the edge of Deir el-Medina and looked at how tightly packed the houses are. And that's why I don't believe that a real temporary structure was erected. But you could have convolvulus sleeves being brought into the home and just being wrapped around. And then that, in a sense, is evoking that birth. The images that we see, like on the Mamasi, where we see Isis or Hathor nursing Horus, and there's all the papyri around them.
Let me just have a look I think Gwyn asked a good question earlier. Where's your question gone? Gwyn, do you want to ask your question? You're muted at the moment.
Talk to me, Gwen.
Okay, I haven't got the mic on now. Very early on, there was a picture of a mum and the baby lying on the bed in front of her. They had an IFAO number, but the baby seemed to be wearing a funerary cone.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I wondered if that signified that the baby hadn't made it.
It's very unusual seeing that, because it does appear to show a funerary cone, and we very rarely ever see children wearing funerary cones. I've pondered. Shall we go back and have a quick look at it? It always does that. Yeah, it could be. I've pondered that in great detail about whether that is a cone. The cone, I'm sure we're all aware that there's huge debates about the cone. Now, some of the ladies on the beds wear a cone and some of them don't. And that is one of the main problems with trying to understand the cone, is that it does not necessarily have any consistency in its representations. I'm sure you're all aware, previously it was thought that it meant the person was perfumed, and it didn't exist. And then at Amana, they have found cones in the South Cemetery, so the non-elite cemetery. But just because they found cones doesn't mean that people actually wore cones. I personally don't think people went around wearing cones on their head. I think they have a significance. And Joan Padgen wrote a PhD about cones, and it's fascinating, because she notes that most cones are actually depicted on men, and you see them in the opening of the mouth ceremony, receiving the gold of valor, and at banquet scenes. And she sees them as your bar receiving offerings. So you're not necessarily dead, because the gold of valor, you're most certainly alive, but your bar is receiving offerings. So perhaps the child here is wearing a cone because he's part of this this celebration, although we haven't got any images of anybody coming along to offer anything. But that's what the whole scene is about. But yes, it's well noted, Gwen, but I've spent many hours on Photoshop peering at great detail at that image, because we can also see he's a boy. I spent a long time looking at these. There are about all the kiosk scenes actually denote the child to be male. Well, the two that we can see the child clearly on denote the child to be male. There's a handful which do clearly show a male child. But yeah, it could have a cone.
Thanks.
I would love you to come back and do the mirror talk with us, Joanne.
Oh yes, I'd love to do the mirror.
Yeah,
the mirrors are fascinating objects. So perhaps in the autumn, when you start back again, we can do the autumn. What's Gwen asking? Oh yes, she's asking.
Yeah, Bev asked, so do you think that these images are kind of like a baby shower, a representation of an ancient Egyptian baby shower?
Definitely, yeah, they are. It's fantastic. Because and that's why I love them. That connection with the past, and how some things just don't change. The gift giving list put a very interesting take on it, that you're actually noting down who brings what, so that you can then make sure that you make a suitable donation yourself.
a wedding list kind of thing.
Yeah. Definitely an ancient baby shower. Once we've got to a point that the child is quite safe, we then invite the girls round, and we have a bit of a party, which is.
We had a lecture about Mesopotamian demons, actually, and there was a similar concept there, that the baby's safe. I think it's day 8 in that case, and that's also when a boy would have been circumcised, because the demon could no longer get to him. And weirdly, it's been found out that the baby's vitamin K levels are maximum at that point, and it's actually the most optimal time to perform any kind of blood-letting type of surgery. So really interesting. I was going to ask, was it a small population of women in that area in comparison with other villages of the same kind of size?
Well, I think what the issue would be that if you're dependent on your home for your husband, so when if you get divorced, as we talked about, then you've got no home. The houses are quite small, but you probably, there's fragments of a census on some Ostraca. So there's generally people's mum, so you look after your mum, your mum's still there. Then you've got your wife, and you might have your sisters. So no, I think it'd probably be quite comparable in terms of house. It's just that once you're not associated with a workman of the village, then you do lose your place in the village.
Do you think that the women of Deir el-Medina would have had less opportunity in life being in Deir el-Medina than being in another settlement?
Well, it's a double-edged sword. It has been suggested that they'd have less economic opportunity, yes, but because the men spend their working week at the huts, for a large portion of the time, the women and the children are going to be in the village on their own. So that might be why we've got such strong female imagery.
So it's possible that a lot of those women, given so much time on their hands, might have done the decoration themselves in those homes, potentially.
It would be lovely to think so. Yes, it would. So it's a double-edged sword, really. You're economically, you're dependent very much because you've got very limited opportunities. Bit of weaving, possibly a wet nurse, but not great opportunities for economic activity. But you're in this really very unique place because the men are likely to have spent the working week at in the huts. It was often thought that they didn't, but there has been evidence found by the Swedish team of fires of cooking up at the huts. So it is likely that the men did stay. But there's Ostraca of men sending notes down to the women in the village, asking them to send things up. So there was clear communication between them.
That was great. Does anyone else have any last questions? And I'll wrap it up and let Jo go and enjoy even still the last dregs of the sun.
Go and drink a glass of wine. That's what Jo's going to do.
That was absolutely brilliant. I found it absolutely fascinating, Joanne. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm just sorry we didn't get to go on to, because I did have some material about stele, so we'll have to do that at another point in time. But I didn't want to try anyone's patience any more than that. So,
fantastic. Really loved it. So look forward to the next one, and definitely want to book mirrors in. So,
yeah, definitely. We'll sort that out, and I'll look forward to that. So thank you all very much for giving up your Sunday evening, and it was very nice to see some familiar faces and some new people.
Yep, thank you everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Okay, bye bye.